What's up, Kosova? This is Coach Q. I'm your host for the upcoming podcast called Never the Right Time. We are on every Tuesdays, 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. 103.5, 105.5 Urban FM. We're going to be talking all things around health, fitness, lifestyle. Please check us out. Thank you for tuning in. This is another episode of Never the Right Time on Radio Urban FM, 103.5, 105.5 FM. Big shout out to our sponsors, Onze Recovery, 5-Star Fitness, and Menda Salon. Thank you guys. So this is your host, Coach Q, aka Kyuta Klinger, and this week I am sitting down with Melita Kabashi. We just mentioned how your last name feels like a Japanese name, but we won't go into that into too much detail. But Melita Kabashi is also the owner of Drith Yoga. I hope I'm pronouncing that.
Yes, you are.
Nailed it. And it'd be great if you could maybe just elaborate on who you are, what you do, where you do it at, and we'll kick this episode off.
Yeah. All right. To start off, you already said I'm Melita Kabashi. I am a yoga teacher, but I also always say that I have two passions, yoga and also children's rights. Those are my two passions, and combining those two, I think it's been really helpful. Mm-hmm. I'm a mom of two daughters. And lovely girls, like they were just in the studio earlier. I thought they were going to hijack our episode. Exactly. They'd probably make for a much more interesting episode, actually. Yes, definitely. And it's been interesting because if I went back to look sort of 20 years back, I never thought that being a yoga teacher would be something that I would do. I was always pretty sporty, so I was always very athletic. I lived in the United States, where, of course, I ran track, played basketball, played soccer and football here, but soccer in the U.S. And eventually, I also got a scholarship to play at a university level. And so I was always very active. Mm-hmm. I always loved to be sort of in action, constantly moving. And then, of course, unfortunately for me, as it is with many players, you end up hurting yourself. So I got two knee surgeries. And then after that, I had to take a break for a while, and it was kind of we talked about this earlier. It's kind of you tend to be lost after you sort of go into, like, you do something that you're passionate about. Yeah,
and also, I mean, I think maybe here it's a little bit different because probably the progression of like football players or any sport players, typically it's like, you are playing throughout your youth, and if you are good enough, then you go professional almost, right? Whereas in the US, collegiate sports is sort of that, for some sports it's almost professional, right? It's almost that one or half a step before, and depending on which school, which division you are, it's almost like your extended tryouts to become a professional, right?
Right.
And I guess you were, which university, if you can share?
Yeah, it was Mercer University. Okay. It was NCAA as well.
Yeah, so it's a serious commitment. And you played all 4 years, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, probably maybe just to give the audience a little bit of an idea, what was that like? Because that's, on top of being a student, right?
Exactly. I think one of the things, I remember my first interview that I went when I came back to Kosovo. And one of the things I mentioned was that I was also a soccer player, because to me that felt like a job. Mm-hmm. Because it really was like a job, having to balance the load of being a player at a college level, where, sometimes some of those sessions are ruthless.
Yeah, you're practicing every day for starters, right?
Yes, every day. Sometimes at the beginning, sometimes it's twice a day. The level of pain, especially I was living in Georgia, especially where, the temperatures go up to 40, 41 degree, and you're out there playing in that weather. It's a different type of endurance for sure. But it also mentally, it really teaches you a lot about collaboration, working in a team environment, but at the same time balancing and learning how to be good at both. Because once you have a scholarship, you also have to make sure that your grades are good as well. Yeah. Otherwise, you end up losing a scholarship if you fail on your schoolwork. Yeah. So being able to keep that balance, it was quite a lesson for me.
Yeah, because I think people really underestimate, and I learned it also the hard way, where I did play collegiate sports for 2 years out of the 4. And then I got cut from the team, but it was quite the shock in terms of, practice sessions are at least 92 hours a day, and then you also have maybe strength work, for example, pre-season, for example, which starts in the summer. You have to come.
It's dreadful. That
pre-season, and I can only imagine how it is in Georgia, right, where it's so humid and whatnot. But it's the commitment is.
Yeah. It was so funny because we were talking, now there's this big thing about ice tubes and, going into ice. And I said, oh my God, I used to do that, 23, 24 years ago, because we literally had to also measure ourselves whenever we'd go. Before we'd play, we had to measure to see how much water weight we're losing. And then when we come back and then go into these ice cold tubes for about 20 minutes sometimes, it was not fun. Not always. Yeah. But it was a good challenge, I can say. And so I was always very used to, as you said, also doing a lot of, from weightlifting and things like that. But and I did try even back then. It was very early on, 2002, 2003. Yoga was starting off, but it was not as big as it is now. And I did start off a few sessions with yoga and Pilates, but there was a period of time where I eventually, got lost, really trying to search in terms of what I like. I couldn't fit into the gym scene here somehow. It just was not me.
Because at that point, when, unfortunately you suffered your knee injuries, and that's where it was okay, I can't play football anymore. How many years were you playing?
So by then it had been, I had played 7 years. Okay. And then after 7 years, it was just...
So, and what age were you at this time when it was okay, this is no more, I can't continue?
22.
So from 15 to 22, essentially, right? That's part of your identity at that point, right?
It is.
When you're so invested and it's also, yes, at the collegiate level, it was at least probably 20 hours a week, let's say, right? And then before that, you're probably also the Saturdays where your parents are probably driving you to the games or wherever you were playing, right? It's still quite a bit of, so at least for me, when, that soccer or football journey came to an end, it was oh wow, that was a huge part of my time.
Right? and it does become part of your identity as well. It does sort of shape you in a certain way, and then when you let go, it is a little bit. For me, I think that was also a phase of depression. One being that, and of course there were so many other things because it was the war in Kosovo, and so many different things that had just, boiled up, and eventually, and all those years after, for me, it was a little bit of, trying to find out what do I want, what do I do, and then of course I got married, and before I had my first daughter, I said, when you come or when you grow up in a occupied country like we did in Kosovo, you grow up with a lot of also anger issues. You grow up with a lot of, I had to leave at the age of 14 on my own with basically $20 in my pocket to go to the United States without my parents. And I had just turned 14. So here I was, this little girl, pre-internet time. So no internet, no Google to tell you where you're going or which plane you're going to catch.
You're trying to figure out who you are as well, right?
Yeah. So. And all those things, you go to United States, now my daughters know English perfectly well because of the internet and so many things. Back then, we did not really know the language that well. So to go to this all new, completely different place, all of those really end up, though they end up making you stronger, they really do also cause a little damage, if I can say so, that you end up carrying them with you. And a lot of times as parents, what we end up doing is that we end up carrying those unhurt moments, those unhealed, basically, components of our self. We end up transferring them to our children from anger, from so many different issues, because we are hurting ourselves. So it's easiest to actually transfer that to your children. And one of the reasons why I started yoga was because I did not want. I wanted to stop there, and I didn't want to transfer those angers basically to my children. By nature, I was, and I am very much of I have a lot of energy, and that energy sometimes is great, but that energy can also come in terms of in volumes, basically, as well, where you transfer that sort of anger.
Yeah, because it's not a one-way street, right? Like,
exactly.
So it's sort of like, it depends on that person. If, for example, just for argument's sake, if that person was an introverted, very shy, and then, it's with good intention, but it might just be like, whoa, okay, can we, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, and kids are so vulnerable. They don't understand. You bring them to this world. They don't understand those things. So I said, you know what? I need to start healing myself. I need to learn how to better know myself, know where I'm hurting, know where are those areas that I need to work and that I need to better understand. Because after all, we talk about good and bad emotions, but there are no really good and bad emotions. They're all emotions. But it's just a matter of how you address those emotions. How aware are you of those emotions? And how do you respond to those emotions? And and for me, yoga was one of the best ways to go into it, to learn into it. And so for the first few years, without, I just did yoga just for my own well-being. And it was a process, basically. And over time, I ended up really seeing the effects that it did, not only for me, but for my entire family as well.
Your immediate circle, kind of.
Yeah, because... yoga the word yoga means union, if you translate it. And the way I remember I did a session with children regarding yoga, and when I wanted to inform them what it means, yoga, what does it mean, union, I gave them the example or the analogy of a puzzle work. So if you are to have puzzle pieces, you see that all the different pieces are different shapes, sometimes different sizes, different forms, and the drawings are different in each one of them.
Sure.
And the beauty of all those is that if you are to look at it as one, yes, maybe one is beautiful, and maybe one can be so similar with the other one, but then they each have their own unique components. Just like human beings, we each have our own genotype, we each have our own unique components. And if we are to understand that about us and bring all those pieces together, we end up creating and forming this beautiful, art piece or whatever that comes out of this puzzle piece. And it's the same thing with human beings. It's all about understanding individually who we are and how can we connect as a union to build this beautiful society, beautiful culture as a whole. And, if you are to look at the puzzle, if one or two pieces are missing, you'll see that it's not whole. You'll see that it's
there are gaps. And,
there are gaps. And it's, there's so much hype about, for example, we know there are 3 different components of yoga that what made me personally fall in love with yoga.
Like the breath work, meditation, and movement, is it?
Breath work, meditation, movement. There's so much philosophy in it, but let's just skip out the philosophy and make it simple for the listeners.
Sure.
3 components: movement, which is the form of asanas, breath work, and meditation. And even meditation, I have a lot of people come in and tell me, I can't do it because I can't stop my thoughts, or my brain is constantly moving.
True.
And that's okay, because that's what your thoughts are supposed to do. Just like you cannot stop the heart from beating, your thoughts will continually be working. And that's okay as well.
Yeah.
But the point of meditation is that it's all about bringing awareness, 1, 2, attention, and the 3rd component is compassion. So whenever you are meditating, those are 3 components that you try to arise within you. Being aware about yourself, the environment, your thoughts, attention, focused attention. So instead of saying, you cannot stop your thoughts, but what you can do is you can learn how to better focus either on one thought or either on your breath or
even just sit in that space, right? Like that's probably where people get hung up on, and they don't, it's sort of like, all right, like let's just kind of tune into these thoughts if they're all racing through your mind, kind of thing, right? So.
Exactly. And, and lastly is the component of compassion, because when you sit there, when you're alone, you start to think about things what is it that you're grateful for? What is it that, the small details of your life that you wouldn't necessarily, when you're constantly working and running and doing things, you don't really have time to notice those little moments.
Taking that step back and seeing like the big picture and...
Yeah, exactly. So it is these 3 components. Then the movement, with yoga, for me, I love the various different flows. There's this concept in Kosovo that... when I came in that, yoga is all about flexibility. It's so easy. It's so simple. Yes, a lot of the poses are very simple.
It can be, and that's nothing wrong with that either, right?
But at the same time, the way it builds strength in you, and not only physical strength, but the strength of the mind, to me was just phenomenal. It's the strongest I've ever been. Not even during my soccer times. I think I have been as strong as I am now.
Okay.
Where I carry out some of these tasks, some of these asana poses, which really require you to go in depth in terms of how you hold yourself, how you use your breath to hold, even when it's very, very difficult. But at the same time, to also know how far can you go into those movements. So it goes back to that awareness. We were talking earlier that in a lot of, for example, CrossFit people, it's like no pain, no gain. You gotta go in it. You gotta. Whereas in yoga, I tell my students, whenever you start feeling pain, that's your body telling you that you need to back off a little bit. Discomfort is a different thing.
Sure.
We need to, that's where growth happens, where you go that extra step, that extra sort of level of discomfort. But pain is never good. Pain is a way to tell you, that's the first signal that your body sends you to say, hey, back off. This is not good for you. And, lastly for me is the fact that it just shows you that, again, we're all so different, and we take away from yoga whatever feels good for me. For me, there's no like one perfect way to go about it. You shouldn't, and I've had these conversations with other yogis where some of them would be like, no, you have to keep the fingers like this and do this or this. And I don't, that's why I even have it, Drith Yoga, today's yoga, because to me, I think it's about taking in what's best for you and accommodating it to your needs, be physical needs, or mental needs as well. So you make it your own.
It feels much more expansive as well. Whereas like when you kind of cap it as like, no, this is how it is. It's like, all right, we're operating within this box almost, right? And actually like, I think part of it is like to just kind of flow openly, right? So
exactly. And that, I guess the beauty is that that's why there's so many yoga teachers out there. There's so many ways of also interpreting and carrying out yoga. To me, I always say it's about, again, it's about you taking in what you think it's best for you at that very moment. After all, again, yoga is all about bringing that awareness and connecting sort of your body, mind, and soul. When I was young, my father would always say to me the Latin word mens sana in corpore sana, meaning healthy body in a healthy mind, and vice versa, a healthy mind in a healthy body. So that's why I also think that the components of the yoga poses, the asanas, are so important as well, because in order for you to be in a healthy state of mind, you should also be in a healthy state of the body. And a healthy state of body doesn't necessarily mean this picture perfect that we constantly see in Instagram.
Sure.
But it's about you feeling good about yourself, whatever shape, whatever form that is. Again, it boils down to those, pieces that we're all different shapes, because naturally we're all born differently. Somebody's taller, somebody's shorter, somebody's wider, somebody's bigger boned.
We're perfectly imbalanced already too, right? So
exactly. Yeah. But it's about you finding that contentment within yourself. It's about you being mindful then of the different, of the way you live your life, from the process of eating. To me, yoga has also helped me that, because it has made me more aware about listening to my body and saying, actually, no, I don't need this right now, or no, this is what my body needs to eat. Instead of being so focused, we also talked about this one, so focused about, today, in breakfast, I have to eat 5 eggs, I have to do this. No, I'm more about listening.
It's very personal, right? So I want to take, a step back in terms of you finding yoga. Was it something immediately that kind of clicked with you in terms of then discovering like, oh, wow, this is going to allow me to kind of, become much more aware and work through the different things that you were dealing with at the time? Because, for example, I think when we initially sat down to have a chat, I kind of briefly maybe told you my experience with yoga, where the first class, going in completely blind, and it was okay, maybe, and it was oh yeah, we're doing some poses, and I've kind of seen this maybe online or on TV or something like this, and I was okay. I didn't really know what to think of it, aside from I'm not sure I really enjoyed it. But then I kind of stuck with it in the sense that I was I'm going to try another class with a different instructor or yogi, and then I had a much better time. There was this better communication, better flow with that different instructor, and I was okay, maybe this is, and again, I wouldn't be able to tell you whether it was a certain type of yoga. I just went to the same studio. It was a different person, and I was like, oh, that felt much more kind of and
in tune with me, basically.
So, maybe it was like something like hatha yoga, which we can also explain like a certain type of yoga, which was very more chill, to like it was like power yoga, and maybe because it was like the sort of early days where I was more like, let's run through the wall at CrossFit kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, I think it was a journey. I don't think that it's... I wouldn't say that once I started, wow, this is it.
And did you start in the U.S. already, like a couple classes?
I did, yes. Actually, I remember I bought a CD at that time.
Okay.
We still had CD players back then.
Yeah.
2001, 2002. So I would, it was MTV Yoga and MTV.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Kristen
All right.
McGee.
Yeah.
It was. I still have the CDs. MTV Yoga and MTV Pilates. But as I said, then it was just there was a period of, I don't know, I just felt like it wasn't, I don't know, it just didn't align with me at that very moment.
Okay.
And it was only after a few years that I went back to it. And I
You still had the CD?
Yes, I still had the CD. And I tried it and I was like, oh, this is actually quite nice. I like it. And then tried a few versions online, and there was this, you're right. This one that I tried, I remember online, I hated the voice. Oh my God, she just got on my nerves with the voice. And she was an amazing teacher, but just with me, it did not align, kind of like what you were saying.
Yeah, and the voice, actually, that's important. Like, I think even more so for yoga, because like, especially if it's a beginner, you have to really talk through while you go. Whereas, for example, as a coach, and especially, let's say, since we've mentioned CrossFit, like there's a lot of demoing, like showing in silence so they see what's going on. Then you first explain, show, and then kind of go through maybe a few checklist points, right?
Right.
And then you have them kind of work through it, and then you kind of speak accordingly, because it's almost, you don't want to overload the person with information. And I think for yoga, yes, there's maybe that fine line of like, okay, I need to be selective with what
words.
But there is a bit of like, and maybe it's also that person's style where it could be a ongoing almost narrative versus, but
right.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's very true. And it wasn't until I really started to sort of this one particular person that was just, it just fit with my type of what I needed right then. And that's what I also tell my students as well. I have people who maybe want to try out. They come in, they might not like my style. And I'm completely okay. There's some people that I say, well, there's this person that does yoga in Prishtina, and this person and this person. Because I think what it's important is for you to be able to find that connection, for you to be able to go to those sessions, regardless of whether it's me or somebody else, as long as you
There's
find...
no one way, right? So,
yeah, as long as you find that connection, because that's what happened for me, somebody else said, oh, this is the best yoga teacher in YouTube. When I went there, I was like, it just doesn't sit with me.
Maybe not for me.
It's not for me, and I had to search for somebody else. So that's why I always say it's very much individual. You have to have a certain connection, certain energy within within a yoga community for it to sort of also flow, as we say, well. And even the journey, like I said, it took a while.
Okay.
It wasn't something that I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. It took quite a few years, and then the pandemics came, and I was like, I'm actually thinking about maybe now the opportunity has opened up for me to maybe
Explore
apply and look for, either scholarships or, because it's expensive also to do, if you want to do it abroad. The courses are quite expensive as well. To
become
To become certified,
Yeah.
yeah. If
And
you
in
of course,
and there's many out there, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, you have also different scales, but if you want to get trained from some of the better ones,
Okay.
they're not necessarily that cheap.
Okay.
But I loved it because it was online and it gave me the time for me to learn at my own pace.
Okay.
And that's what I loved because I had the opportunity to go back, to re-listen, to review, to work them myself. And I think if I would have gone on a face-to-face, these sessions that are like 2 weeks, for example, become a certified trainer for
Like
2
an
weeks.
intensive kind of course, kind of, yeah.
It wouldn't have been the same. I think
Okay.
I would have, in most of these places, they always say you take away about 20% and 80% you seem to forget when it's such a short period of time,
Okay.
reality speaking.
Yeah.
But then when you're there for, and I took about a year and a half really to go through it. Because there were so many videos. I mean, there were like in total about 800 different videos, some shorts, but it was quite a lot. So to go through all of those and to really grasp them, to really understand the meaning, it took a while. And you just like with everything else, it's a journey.
Yeah.
I'm continually learning. I love to also be a teacher, but also be a student as well.
I think they go hand in hand, right? Like...
They have to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, again, you stop growing yourself if you don't put yourself on the other side as well. It's difficult for you to relay that message as well if you don't know what it was like to be a student. So in order to really make sure that that other person understands.
Not to mention, I mean, you're dealing with humans, right? Like going back to your analogy of different piece puzzles, size shapes, that kind of thing. So it's like when you're cueing maybe a certain pose or flow, maybe it doesn't work for someone like the second person versus the first person kind of, right? Like,
exactly.
And there are different levels as well, right?
Exactly. So. And I always say that's the beauty of yoga as well, because there's so many different levels. We use a lot of different props. We have blocks, we have bolsters, we have so many different things to actually help you elevate yourself and to help you better go through different scales. So even within one class, you can have from the beginner to the advanced, because they can all do different levels of poses with certain modifications depending whether you are a beginner or whether you are intermediate or a little bit more advanced. So and again in a lot of classes, for me personally, I try to incorporate breath work as well, meditation, and the flows, the asanas. So within one class, it's kind of like you get more of that holistic approach, whereby, I've even had people where they've continually started to cry from a meditation session. Because, again, we go back to that point of you take back what you feel, what you think you need most at that time. And I may guide students through a meditation session. And for somebody, it may be just restful and good. And for somebody else, it can feel like just
it triggers something.
It triggers something, yeah. So that's why I always say it's very individual. And everybody who comes to my class, I always tell, they know that I always tell them, this is your mat, this is your space, this is your home. I don't have mirrors because I don't want you to look at, let me see, am I doing this? I want you to focus on being present, on being into the moment, on learning to feel your body, learning to feel how that pose feels on you, necessarily than just what it looks on on a mirror or
I mean it can be helpful, but it's often maybe a distraction too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think if you're doing one-on-one, it's probably different. But if
it's a group session,
it's a group session, it can be distracting a little bit if you're trying to constantly look. Oh, but that person's doing it like this. I'm not doing it. No, we're we're all different. We all, I do yoga. I've done yoga for so many years, and I'm not very flexible. I can't say, because also the way my body is born, you have the hypermobile people, which their ligaments are easily stretchable, they overextend, and they are naturally prone to just doing a split right there and then. And I can tell those people just because of the way they, like, even when they stand, the way their hand sort of like flops out, you can tell when they're hypermobile versus...
and that poses also other challenges, right? Versus those that are stiff as a brick, for example.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And that's what I try to tell also people that are hypermobile when they come in. And I say, yes, you have to also learn how to build different strength, because if you don't put all your weight in, for example, your shoulder strength, you end up hurting your joint, because then all the weight goes in your joints instead of the muscles holding you up. And that's why over time people then tend to have problems with their elbows or problems with their wrists and things like that, because of the way they overload their joints because they are hypermobile.
They end up compensating in their own way, right? Yeah,
your body does that. I always tell them that your body compensates. So if you're doing something, your body will always try to look, what's the easiest way? It's going
to try to figure out how to win the game, so to say, right?
Yes.
Versus like trying to kind of like, okay, is this actually like the proper way to do, or am I actually engaging what I need to be engaging, right? Versus trying to fit the mold of that position, kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember I had one student who came in and she was like, oh my God, I just realized I've done yoga completely the wrong way for so many years. She said, I never knew that this was how you were supposed to engage, your legs with this type of pose, or your core with this type of a pose, because it's all about how you engage your body. And I often have people saying, oh, but you must, to me, I think the most important, just like in everything else, it's consistency. Whatever you do, is just show up on the mat, be consistent, be there for yourself, and commit to investing for your well-being. I have a lot of people who, will say, I'm sorry, that's so, it's expensive or this. And I'm like, it's just a matter of priorities, whether you want to buy, I don't know, a jacket that you might wear one time, 2 times, or a blouse that you might wear 1 time or 2 times, or whether you invest in your health, that basically long-term, the returns would be a lot higher than that one jacket or that one shirt that you wore a couple of times. So it's just, it depends on priorities. And as I said, it's also good to combine different things as well. I often get asked, most of my group classes are twice a week. Why do you only do them twice a week? Because I say it's good for people to also do other things as well. Of course, if somebody is like a yoga lover and they want to do 4 times, 5 times a week, that's a different story. But in general, I think it's good to combine, do a mixture of things, from maybe one day walking, yoga, gym, weightlifting, and just give your body
different stimulus
stimulus. Exactly. But I also say that with yoga, I have people that have been in the gym, but then when they come to do yoga, they're like, oh my God, my whole body is shaking. I didn't know that it's so difficult. And because it's a different way of using your body. It's a different type of resistance. And of course, you use your own body weight. So it's a different way to lift. Maybe, I don't know, you can lift probably quite a lot, but it's different.
And then also like when you're holding certain positions, like that time under tension, right?
Yes. These isometric trainings, as we call, they're
very effective in their own right.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
In terms of sort of like, I think we skimmed over it briefly, but like, so you kind of mentioned like one, I guess, class of like how it might flow, right? With the different sort of, you know, the flow with a bit of meditation, breath work kind of weaved in. For the layman, including myself, for example, like I think we briefly, like when we talked previously, it was sort of like Vinyasa yoga is one form that you've kind of focus on. Is that, I mean, you probably do other types as well, but is that sort of maybe just to kind of explain what the differences might be? And also like for someone who's like really starting from scratch, like what could they expect at your kind of sort of beginner session, for example?
Right. So I do have, there are various different types of
and it kind of, that's probably also where it gets a little confusing for someone who's like, they just think yoga, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's even confusing for me because that, there are constantly new things coming up as well. But for me, I personally, so I was trained in Vinyasa yoga. So Vinyasa is basically a flow of movement, and it typically encompasses one breath, one movement. So you inhale, you do one pose, you exhale, you do another pose, you inhale, another pose, exhale. So one breath, one movement. And over time, you learn to better control your breath and better control yourself in certain poses by at times holding your breath, then knowing when to also let go. And
also breathing correctly, right?
Exactly.
Like that's probably one big like surprise for anyone that starts or gave yoga a try, right?
And then that's the thing, that when you I've seen a lot of people that breathe completely incorrect. From, for example, when they inhale, their stomach goes in, and then when they exhale, their stomach goes out. Not using their diaphragm, they focus more on chest breathing because of, we're constantly in a seated position where our shoulders are basically rounded up. So the minute that you are constantly in that position, it's difficult for you to breathe through your diaphragm. So you only end up breathing through
the diaphragm's limited in the movement, right?
Exactly. And, the diaphragm is basically a muscle. So just like any muscle, if you stop using it, it's going to be gone. And same thing with the diaphragm. If we stop using it, it's going to be gone. And over time, that will cause a lot of implications on your chest, shrinking of chest, which will end up, especially after, I'm 43. So in 7 years, I'll be 50. And after 50 and 60, the lung capacities really start to shrink quite a lot. And hence, breathing is correct breathing is super important. Not just your breath, basically, it's a mirror of your health in a way. And it's a mirror of your emotional state as well. How you breathe, it will show you whether you're angry, whether you're sad, whether you are scared. When you're scared, or when you're angry, your breathing goes up and you basically do a lot of chest breathing.
Yeah.
And when you're calm, we notice that your breathing goes down. But then we see a lot of people that breathe through their mouth. Yes,
that's like really apparent, and like the difference of mouth and nasal breathing, right? And
it's huge. And the damages long term are enormous because we end up, and of course, it's just like everything else in science, it's very ambiguous. Somebody will say this way, somebody will say no, but we don't have enough research to back that off. But I think a lot of research do sort of highlight the importance of nasal breathing. I mean, I've read books from even if you can call them, there weren't even scientists, but they did studies, for example, back in 1800s, where they looked at some of the Indian populations at that time, American Indian populations, and how they saw that they had such a huge focus on nasal breathing. Even, I'm talking about 1800s, this is 1860s, 1850s, and how they taught children from a very young age to breathe through their nose. In that book, they talk about also how mothers sometimes would stay awake to watch their children, or they would like ensure that they would close their mouth so they could start breathing through their nose. And they also saw why a lot of, yes, it's genetics as well, but there was that conception that nasal breathing also, of course, we know now from studies that it helps you.
Yeah, the facial features changes, right?
Yes, facial feature change, body features change as well. And because the circulation is better when you breathe, properly. Instead of chest breathing, basically you limit, you put your heart at so much stress because it feels like your cortisol levels are constantly rising because it's that quick, fast breathing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's already nasal breathing where we, let's say, even slow things down. You tap into the vagus nerve where the parasympathetic, things are calming down. I mean, not to mention, I think like with nasal breathing, you oxidize the air. So the amount of oxygen actually is much more increased. I mean, you also filter out toxins much more.
Yes.
I mean, if it's just mouth breathing, you are just inhaling it all. Like there's no filter. It goes pretty much, I guess, to the lungs, right? Whereas,
to me, it was, when I did a course on breath work and when I read also some books around breathing, I didn't even know that like physiologically our noses are different. Because, for example, the further north you are, because it's colder, the longer the noses are and the narrower the nostrils are, because it takes time for the breath for your nose to warm it up
as well. Yeah.
And to turn it. Whereas in the south, or sort of more southern African countries, their noses are flatter and they're wider and shorter, because the air is warmer. So it's a different way of basically for your nose to work. So to me, that was just like, wow, that's, it's amazing. And on top of that, when you do nasal breathing, you basically, you filter out, as you said, a lot of different chemicals from the outside. But another good component is that when you learn not only just to breathe in oxygen, but also to hold your breath for longer periods, you end up building carbon dioxide in your body. And we often have been told that, including myself, that carbon dioxide is bad for you. That's why we exhale it. But carbon dioxide is actually good for your body. We need to be able to have more carbon dioxide and to build up more carbon dioxide in our body, because it's basically the carbon dioxide that takes all those blood cells to the places that it needs. So if you are working out, the more carbon dioxide you have, the more blood will rush to where you are, for example, pumping weights or doing things like that. And carbon dioxide is also a chemical that it calms you down. It's a relaxing chemical. We don't think about it, but for example, you see people, when they breathe when they get stressed and anxious, and they breathe in those like brown bags.
Oh yeah.
And what calms them down is actually the carbon dioxide.
Increased levels of carbon dioxide?
Yeah, because they're breathing their own carbon dioxide. So that one actually calms them down. And it, so it's also a calming component as well. And we often don't think about it that way, because again, we've been used to saying carbon dioxide is bad. Or when you go to the gym, you see a lot of people doing a lot of like exhaling, which is not necessarily bad when you want to, there are sometimes breathing techniques that you want to be able to.
Yeah, in terms of strength training wise, like,
Yeah, and to also, activate your, or put stress, consciously put stress into your body so you know what it's like. But when you do that constantly, you actually end up losing so much carbon dioxide, and it's not always good also in strength training to do that continual sort of forceful exhales. And so it's these things that, as I said, I'm continually learning as well. I'm continually applying to myself, and hence I'm applying a lot of these different techniques also to my students, which have been helpful for me. So I hope that
it's an exchange, clearly.
Yeah.
So then in terms of the vinyasa, so then if a beginner student would come to your class,
Right.
then how is that kind of...
it flowed in a completely different...
absolutely, which is great. Like, I mean, clearly there's going to be a breathwork component. I mean, that's...
Yes.
If it's a vinyasa class, then already that movement, one breath per pose kind of...
Right.
is going to be the kind of, I guess, how
it's there.
Yeah.
And, and I often tell my students to be patient sometimes. I know, for example, when I was doing power yoga at the beginning or vinyasa flows at the beginning, sometimes it's so difficult and you cannot do one breath, one movement. And I remember myself, I'd be like, whenever they would say, hold this pose, breathe here for 3 breath counts, I'd be like, oh my God, how much longer, are we going to hold?
Yeah.
So I would often tell them that it's okay, be patient. It takes time to go to that one breath, one movement component. But that's one of them. That's,
okay.
You have vinyasa flows, which are power yoga or dynamic yoga sessions. But then I also incorporate and I do yin yoga, which is a lot slower. It focuses more on flexibility components, where you end up holding some of those poses from 1 to 3 minutes, maybe even to 5 minutes, because you end up going a little bit deeper into some of those connective tissues to really stretch those layers of fascia underneath. But also at the same time, it teaches you about stillness. Like for me, yin yoga was so difficult to do because I was a very dynamic person. So to be able to sit in one position where your mind was constantly running, and for you to say, okay, just calm down, it's okay to be here, be present, be okay within this space. It really takes a lot, and it's a lot harder, or at least it was a lot harder for me.
No, I think that's already one static pose, but for example, for even some of my clients to do, let's say, a movement repetitively for, let's say, a 30-second period or a 60-second, like 30 seconds probably fine, but then the moment it gets into maybe 60 seconds or say 2 minutes or so, even when it's a dynamic thing where they're doing, one movement, or they have to be on the air bike for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, let's say, like, people struggle, like, it's like, I tell them sometimes it is going to be a bit of a mind game. And they're just trying to occupy themselves. They can't, they're like, oh, this is so boring, or, and it's, people struggle with just something that might appear as monotonous, or
Exactly. And, and again, it's about working with your body, working with your brain to be okay in that stillness, to be okay, and to also understand that we're so used to being these multitasker people because of the way life is now. But to learn to switch off, to learn to say, okay, I'm going to focus just on this one thing, and I'm going to be okay focusing on this one thing. Or to simply learn to just give yourself 10 minutes a day. I always tell my students, even 5 minutes a day of yoga, breath work, anything, it's better than once a week for 60 minutes. It's the consistency that counts. It's showing up on the mat at whichever form. It's what counts. And so, again, yin is one of those that we do. Then we also do restorative. I also incorporated a lot of restorative yoga. And restorative is basically what it says, restore. It's all about healing back your body. It's all about using different props to hold different poses, but poses that are supposed to be relaxing for your body, so they allow you basically to go back and to restore and to heal your body. Another one that I use, it's Hatha yoga.
Okay.
So Hatha yoga again is it's slower, but the poses are also quite dynamic in the sense that some of the poses are can be quite challenging as well, and you end up holding them a little bit longer, but it's not a flow just like it is, for example, in a vinyasa flow. They're sort of more intercepted. They're more, we go from one pose and then we'll do something completely different, and then so there's no flow in it like you would in a vinyasa flow, where you just feel like it's kind of like a dance basically. With Hatha it's not like that. So it's Hatha, the word actually means force. So a lot of the words are, the poses are forceful. It's
kind of powerful.
Powerful.
Like,
But again, it's slower than the vinyasa or power yoga. So for me, for the moment, these are the 4 different ones that I introduce to my students. Of course, there's so many other forms. I also prefer other types of yoga. I'm not going to go into that actually, but because some names are, it's just.
I guess some there's probably stuff that you also personally explore, like that you aren't necessarily kind of like offering to your students.
And just to see, but what I try, for example, what I've made different from some of my yoga classes, that, for example, during a week, I already said that I offer 2-day sessions. So one day it'll be more of a power vinyasa dynamic type of flow, and then one day will be more restorative yin. So they get to experience both both type of
it almost complements each other maybe too,
and
right?
complement, because to give your body a rest. So if we are really working out one day, then sort of after 2 days you want to give your body rest. You want to give that body also ways of going deeper into some of those poses. But at the same time, I also try to make it different. I was a person who I would get bored if I did the same type of yoga. It would be so boring for me. So I was like, I need a variety, and that's what I try to also give my students. So within, for example, a 1 month within that program, I have 1 week that we will focus more around, say maybe upper body more. So the poses that focus more on arms and shoulders. And then one day we'll focus more on lower body and glutes. And then one day it'll be more core-based focus type of work and flexibility. And then another day would be maybe focusing around, like a total body flow, kind of like an Ashtanga type of flow, which is Ashtanga is like one of the strongest and the most difficult types of form, because it's very repetitive, but it's fast moving and
quite demanding.
Demanding. Yes. So giving this flexibility and based on the feedback that I've had from my students is that it has made it interesting for them, that it has not been boring for them, and they do want to come back because of this variety and flexibility that I provide within a class.
And it's probably also in the sense you are defining or providing a definition of yoga, especially to the local population here, right? Where maybe people have heard of it but aren't too familiar, or just have this notion of what they basically saw online or somewhere else, right? Like,
to me, the funniest was that most people, when they thought of yoga, is that, oh, yoga is just, it's too easy. It's all stretching. And I really wanted to change this concept around it, that no, yoga is a lot more than that. It's about strength. And as I said, strength of the body and of the mind. And the process through elevating yourself and growing yourself, both physically and mentally. And and it's not until people actually begin to try it that they see, okay, I understand what you mean around the strength component.
Yeah.
And but what I love most, and what I try to tell my students most, is that love the journey.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the destination, because it's the journey that will make you grow. Not necessarily are you going to be happy once you reach the destination, but I think what's going to make you happy is the process of how you got there.
Yeah, because I mean, there's similar sort of I guess notions or in training as well. Like goals come and go.
Yeah.
Right, and sometimes we're really happy when we achieve it, and sometimes it can be like, oh, okay, like actually, you had all this, like you hyped it up so much, and then so it really depends. But at least if there is the habits are in place, or the system or the plan is in place, or there is this appreciation for the journey as well, then we all deviate from time to time, but you can always come back to it, and that there's this, like, the good kind of structure or good kind of routine in place, right? That kind of, props us up, right?
Exactly. And, I laugh a lot of times when I see, you see a lot of videos that say, do a split in 4 weeks, or I'll teach you how to do this in, 2 weeks time. And to me, I find it so funny, because there are maybe some people that physically will never be able to do a split, just because the way their body shape is, the way their bones are.
So there's certainly a prerequisite for a lot of things, right? Like,
yeah. And secondly, I always tell people, some of them come and ask me, will I lose weight? It's the same thing hype with, for example, come to the gym to lose weight. If you don't change a lot of other things, you're not going to lose weight. It's
not just one aspect, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a combination of all. And again, I go back to yoga, that for me, what I love, because with yoga, I felt like it has changed my mindset around so many other things, around being mindful about food, mindful about my sleep, mindful about my, balance in terms of how much time I spend with my children, how much time, I spend with work. And it's all those components that have, to me, that make yoga so special. And and that's why, when people say, but how did you become so fit with yoga? For me, yes, because I'm consistent and I do it, I do it daily. But again, I boil it down to the fact that you want to feel good about yourself. You go somewhere because you want to feel good. My aim is that every person that comes out of my studio, for them to say, ooh, I feel better, I feel happier, and I feel stronger. Mm-hmm. Be it mentally, be it physically. That's what I want for them to get out when they not to say, I look thinner, or I look this, or I look that. Because, life can... I sure gained a lot of weight after I had my surgeries. Life can change,
Yeah.
And you have to be able to adapt and to learn to adapt. And, same thing when a lot of people say, oh, I want to be able to do a handstand or to do this, in this short period of time. And I say, in due time, because it's a process, and it depends also on the person. For me, because I started yoga much later on, just the concept of learning the fear and growing over that fear of falling over, it was a process. It took me a long time, and I'm still working.
Yeah, and
that.
I mean, for you also, like coming, like already just taking it from the perspective of like life after football or soccer, right? It was almost like rebuilding yourself on top of, yes, there were other things happening, but kind of like not filling the void, I guess, almost reinventing yourself, right?
Yeah.
It was probably a better way to put it. But one last thing, as we're gonna wrap this conversation up, and I really appreciate your time for being pretty candid and open about your journey around from already traveling to the States and then back, and then also kind of like discovering yoga and becoming an instructor, and then opening up your studio. But one thing that maybe people can take away from sort of like maybe perhaps starting yoga, as well as then sort of where can they find you?
Well, whoever asks, I always say, just start. It doesn't matter either with me. I have 2 other colleagues that I share the yoga studio. They're just as wonderful. There's so many wonderful teachers out there because we all bring a different perspective, a different way of teaching yoga. So whomever you go, I think that what's important is just for you to start at least once a week, incorporate it within your work, within your life. Just some of the techniques that you can get from meditation, breath work, hopefully some of those you will be able to take away with you and incorporate them in your daily life. So to me, I always say just start. It doesn't matter where. The beauty is that there's so many yoga teachers there, and you go wherever it fits your needs best. Secondly, if of course they are interested, I do have only an Instagram account. I'm still debating on whether I want to open TikTok or not, because I feel like I'm 43 and I have kind of a sort of, my audience is like in my 30s and up, and I feel like all 30s and up, they basically have Instagram, and whoever has TikTok usually has Instagram as well, so they're likely to see it.
Okay.
But yeah, they can find me in Instagram. It's Drith, D-R-I-T-H, or Drith. Very weird name. I know so many of even my family members are like, why aren't you not giving it like a flow studio or yoga or something like that? Why Drith? And it's interesting because I had a dream almost 5 years back, and I was in the middle of this like field of grains, basically wheat.
Okay.
And I just woke up, and that just kind of inspired me. And they said Drithra. I was like, Drith. That's what I'm going to use. That's going to be my name, because to me, for a wheat to grow, you need the ground, the soil. So you need to be grounded as a person.
Sure.
But you also need to water it, to nurture it. At the same time, you need the sun to give it love and to just help it grow. But you also need the wind to make sure that it challenges, because it's through that challenge that it stays sort of grounded. And it's all those different components that I think very much relate to life itself, and to what hopefully we in the yoga community try to relay basically to our students. So that was the name. It does have a meaning behind it. It's not just a name that popped out, but it does have a meaning behind it. And I stuck to it, despite, as I said, so many people telling me that it just sounds weird, or the TH in the end, Drith, it's so hard to say. But I said, even Nike, when they started, it was like, Nike. I read the book, and I know he said that he hated it. He was like, what is this, Nike, But yeah, I think it's just like everything else. If you make it your own, and if you put your heart to it, it will just flow.
Okay, excellent. Well, Melita, thank you so much for your time. And guys, that was another episode of Never the Right Time with Drith Yoga, Melita Kabashi. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well. I really enjoyed it. It was, it was a great conversation. I appreciate.
Let's do this again.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.